Chapter 1 The World as of Now. Watching from a rooftop, she knows the streets of Philadelphia are finally beginning to have some foot traffic. Silk nibbled some sushi from her takeout plastic container. The seaweed wrapping had gone soggy and the rice had the flavor of age. She didn't mind, though. The restaurant owners never charged her since she thwarted a robbery last year at their fledgling business. Silk is a hero, but never rose to the level of superhero, a joke she's often recycled for different people over the years. Although the quickly dwindling numbers of superheroes around the world may get her promoted faster to that title than she's ready for. While it's comforting to see people continuing their lives on the streets below, things were not the same. Businessmen carrying bats to work, moms with strollers lined with flock vests, and hardly a building left that did not show some scarring of a fight or battle. The over-publicized reporting of every superhero casualty has led on waves of petty crime and violence. For a long time, no one dared leave their homes. However, for every superhero killed, a supervillain was also taken down. Silk, of course, was partly responsible for this, as she was working still for the Daily Bugle in the New Philadelphia office. There she was known as Cindy Moon. Silk was saving her salmon maki for last since it was her favorite, but with an echoing scream from below, she would have to wait a bit longer. She stood and tightened the three-point sling on her Benelli M4 and tapped the shell pouch on her thigh, checking to make sure she had brought extras. Having spider powers, her senses directed her to the alley. Her natural webbing formed quickly at her fingertips as she leapt down, using her downward momentum to swing to the side of the building she had been camping on. Down below, she spotted a catering van covered in rats, dozens of them scurrying and biting, trying to get inside with desperation. Rats, Silk thought to herself as she landed behind the van. Better than a few thugs with pipes. Using both hands, she shot bursts of webbing at each rat, wrapping each one in a painful cocoon of barbed webbing. Before she could speak and give the woman hiding inside the all clear, a rattling hiss came from behind her. She turned her head with a flick, letting her long black hair land on her shoulders and out of the way. Standing there was a grotesque humanoid sharing more features of a rat than a man. "We didn't invite you for supper, darling," he hissed from his brown teeth and blistered lips. "You should have invited me. I'm a great party guest," Silk replied with a coy smirk. "Now, who are you exactly? I assume if you're still running around the city causing havoc, you must be low on the totem pole of baddies." The rat man squatted, ready for a pounce. "I am Vermin, and I could say the same about you, Miss Silk." Her eyes darted away for a second, reflecting on his comment. He was right, of course. She was only alive because she was not a major player in the Avengers, or any other super team for that matter. She mostly worked alone, and that was fine by choice, but now she worked alone because there were so few heroes left. Vermin took advantage of Silk's dropped guard and lunged with great speed. The ratty blur in the air was stopped by a swing of the fist, knocking the creature to the ground. Vermin recovered to his feet, surprised at Silk's reaction time and speed. The two stared into each other's eyes. The squeaking of the rat still chirped in the alley. Vermin leapt for a swipe, only to have his arm grabbed and tossed back to the ground by Silk. He shrieked a cry, and from the dumpsters, gutters, and litter, a dozen more rats emerged and swarmed at Silk. She jumped and latched to the building, using one hand to shoot globs of her web at each encroaching rat. More and more rats flooded the alley. She was quickly overrun and lost grip, falling to the ground. Like ants on a worm, she was covered. Panic set in as she flopped and tried ripping the little biters off of her. Suddenly her vision blurred as Vermin gave her chest a stomp, knocking the wind from her. The little bites all over her became a secondary concern as she defensively lifted her arms to block the next stomp from the now laughing Vermin. Silk felt something in her change from panic to an old feeling. Her arms aching from blocking the stomps, and the feeling of dirty rat teeth taking bites sent her to a place she had not been for so long now. Blind, uncontrollable rage. Her hands throbbed, and from her fingers, claws grew out. She pulled her arm back to swipe at Vermin, ready and willing to slice him into 4 pieces with a single blow. But the alley lit with a blue glow, and as Silk looked at Vermin standing over her, a blue plasma-like ball struck Vermin instantly, killing him. His body stood for a moment, the hole in his chest so big she could see the sky through it. The rats biting her had their spell of control broken and ran off, covered in as much blood as Silk was now. Her claws retracted and she turned her head back and saw where the shot had come from. Standing on the roof, adjacent to where Silk was earlier eating her lunch, an outline shimmered, a reflection of the sky behind it. The trick was revealed as the mirror dissolved, showing a tall, muscular figure. One of them Silk puffed from her aching lungs. Around its neck was the King Ch1 necklace, and tucked into its hip belt was a sai with a red cloth tied to it sailing in the wind, its body scarred from burns and mask charred. Silk's ears tingled, and her head was getting a static. The shoulder-mounted weapon on the creature had turned towards her now. She kicked at the floor, back-flipping over the smoking bloody ruins of Vermin's body. Just a plasma burst hit the ground, leaving a basketball-sized hole in the concrete where she had just been. She raised her arms and spun a web out across the street and yanked at them with all her strength, slingshotting herself into the air. Without daring to look back, she alternated building to building with her webs, gaining momentum as she started fleeing from the hunter, the wet blood drying quick and turning sticky from the wind around her as she swung frantically away. Back at her home, the steam from the shower in Cindy's rustic, single-bedroom apartment had filled the washroom. Her fingers now pruned, and despite a third shampoo treatment to her hair, she still felt as though Vermin's blood and pieces were on her. She stepped from the shower, drying herself, and then wrapping the towel around her, creating a towel dress. As she stepped out of the washroom, a voice startled her. "Close call today, huh?" Her one hand secured the towel and the other darted out, already starting to form webbing at the man sitting on her couch. The man spoke with confidence and gentleness as he raised his hands in surrender, one of which was holding a shield badge. "I'm with S.H.I.E.L.D., Silk." His eyes glanced over her, not so subtly, and stopped at her hand holding the towel. "You should let go of that and web me with both hands just to be safe." His badge looked legitimate, yet he was in beaten jeans and a casual t-shirt. Her Silk sense was at ease, enough to convince her that the intruder meant no harm. She lowered her hand to reinforce the towel dress and met his eye on the darkened room. "What are you doing here?" He opened a laptop on the coffee table and spun it towards her, playing a video clip. "I'm here because of this." Cindy looked and saw a video of her escape from earlier. The camera's perspective was from inside the catering van. The agent leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Filmed by the lady you left in the alley after your half-rescue." Cindy's hand shook and her face drooped, and an awful twisting in her stomach churned. The agent closed the laptop lid out of mercy and continued. "I'm sure some people are mad. I'm sure many more are worried about the state of the vigilante freaks they so relied on for all these decades. But at S.H.I.E.L.D., we see an opportunity." He leaned back into his comfy, relaxed position on the couch. "We're still holding the line at New York, keeping containment through checkpoints on the bridges and tunnels. The first few weeks we heard gunfire hourly, then daily, and now only a few times a week." He points to her shotgun resting in the corner. "More and more are getting out of the city limits. We figured out they swim, and some of the sneaky bastards still find a way through the National Guard post. Mostly, though, they're going north into Connecticut." Cindy stood still listening, the steam starting to dissipate around her and her stomach knotting tighter. "That is until recently. Newark, New Jersey has had an increase in missing persons reports, and just yesterday a swarm of the bugs were brazen enough to start running through the streets. We think they have a new nest there." Cindy knew now why he was gesturing to her shotgun as he spoke. Many heroes started carrying firearms due to the acidic blood of the bugs. The man continued. "And with the hunters have been showing up more and more frequently, we feel after your retreat here," and he started tapping on the laptop again, "that the hunters will not target you like they have so many others. We're asking if you would go to Newark and assess the situation and find the infestation if there is one." Cindy's hands clenched at her towel until her knuckles had turned white. The man pulled a card from his pocket and placed it on the table as he gathered his laptop. "My name is Agent Brent Furman. Hang on to my card and think about it." Brent stood, and as he walked towards the door, he paused for a few final words of encouragement. "You know, many of our agents and heroes have went AWOL. S.H.I.E.L.D. respects that you're still out there despite the risks you face, and I'm sure any blunders can be redeemed." Cindy's body twitched with a startle at the door closing behind her as Brent left. She sat to the couch with a plop and a sigh and went deep into thought. She was there in New York City for the crash and the chaos of the evacuation during the first days. The bugs were akin to the colony habits of ants, horrific abominations that looked like mechanically infused insects, tall, fast, and strong too. Her eyes looked to Agent Furman's card on the table. She had never confessed it to anyone, but many nights since the New York infestation she would have nightmares of the monsters. Simply put, she was not thrilled at the idea of confronting any of them head-on, or alone. With a trembling inhale to gather her composure, she went to the door and opened it to catch Agent Furman before the elevator did. She yelled down the hall, "I'll do it!" He gave her an approving nod and stepped into the elevator, letting the doors close behind him. Be sure to come back for Chapter 2 and discover, along with Silk, the horrific and terrifying events taking place in Newark.